Ma'am, step out of the car now.
Officer, this is my car and my home. Please check my ID before proceeding.
I said step out. You're being detained for vehicle theft and resisting arrest.
I am Judge Patricia Williams, a federal judge. Please verify.
The aftermath began almost immediately. The incident was no longer a street-level blunder. It was a full-blown crisis for the department. Officer Thompson was immediately placed on administrative leave, but for Judge Williams, this was not just about one rogue officer. It was about the system that created and enabled him. She spent the next day not on the bench, but in a series of quiet, intense meetings with her own legal counsel, the formidable civil rights attorney David Chen. A federal lawsuit was filed, a meticulously prepared case that aimed to expose not just the actions of one officer, but the systemic pattern of racial bias and the profound failure of supervision within the department. The lawsuit named Officer Thompson for the constitutional violations, Sergeant Morrison for inadequate supervision, and the entire police department for fostering a culture that allowed such abuses to occur. The legal battle that followed lasted for 18 months and was a grueling public ordeal. The discovery phase was a deep dive into the department's culture, and what it uncovered was damning. The federal lawsuit filed by Judge Patricia Williams' legal team, led by the renowned civil rights attorney David Chen, was not merely a complaint, it was a surgical dissection of a police department's culture. The 18-month legal battle that followed was a grueling, public ordeal, with every motion and filing scrutinized by the media. The discovery phase, in particular, was a deep, uncompromising dive into the department's practices, and what it uncovered was damning. David Chen's team began by subpoenaing the entirety of Officer William Thompson's personnel file. It was a document that the department was legally obligated but clearly reluctant to produce. When it finally arrived, it told a story of systematic failure. The 14 citizen complaints were not just numbers on a page. They were individual stories of humiliation and fear. There was a complaint from a young black college student pulled over for a supposed broken taillight that was, in fact, working perfectly, who was then subjected to an intimidating, hour-long roadside interrogation. There was another from a respected local pastor, a man in his 60s, who was ordered out of his car and frisked in the church parking lot after being accused of casing the area. In every single one of the 12 race-related complaints, the outcome was the same. A cursory, internal review that concluded with findings of insufficient evidence or unfounded, and the officer was summarily exonerated. No pattern was ever identified. No corrective action beyond a simple check-the-box memo was ever taken. Next, Chen's team, working with a forensic statistician from a nearby university, analyzed 5 years of the department's traffic stop data. The numbers painted an undeniable picture of bias policing. Black drivers, who made up only 12% of the city's population, accounted for nearly 48% of all traffic stops. The data further revealed that black drivers were searched at a rate 3 times higher than their white counterparts. Even though the hit rate, the percentage of searches that actually yielded illegal contraband, was identical for both groups. This statistical proof was the smoking gun, demonstrating that the department's enforcement was not driven by legitimate suspicion, but by racial prejudice. The legal team also subpoenaed the department's training records and materials. What they found was shocking in its inadequacy. The entirety of the department's constitutional rights and racial bias training consisted of a single 4-hour PowerPoint presentation that new recruits sat through once during their academy training. There was no follow-up, no continuing education, and no scenario-based training to address the complexities of implicit bias. It was a system designed not to foster professional, unbiased policing, but merely to create a paper trail of compliance. Furthermore, the department's early warning system, a software tool designed specifically to flag officers who accumulate multiple complaints or show patterns of problematic behavior, had indeed flagged Officer Thompson on 3 separate occasions over the years. In each instance, the flag was reviewed by his direct supervisor, Sergeant Morrison, who simply signed off on the report with a handwritten note addressed with Officer. No further action needed. This directly implicated the chain of command, proving that the failure was not just at the level of the individual officer, but extended deep into the department's management. The deposition of Officer Thompson was a pivotal moment. Held in a sterile, wood-paneled conference room, the atmosphere was thick with tension. On one side sat David Chen, sharp, precise, and relentless, On the other was Thompson, sullen, defensive, and visibly uncomfortable without the shield of his uniform and badge. Chen began by playing the body cam footage on a large monitor, walking Thompson through the encounter frame by agonizing frame. "Officer," Chen asked, his voice deceptively calm. At this moment, when Judge Williams is sitting in her car in her own driveway, what specific, articulable threat did you perceive that caused you to rest your hand on your service weapon? Thompson stammered, falling back on jargon. "It's standard procedure, officer safety. You never know what you're walking into, but you do know, don't you?" Chen countered, pointing to the screen. "You're in a quiet, suburban driveway. It's the middle of the afternoon. The driver is a well-dressed, middle-aged woman. Where is the threat, officer?" Thompson had no credible answer. The deposition continued for 6 hours. Chen methodically dismantled his report, forcing him to confront the chasm between his written account and the video evidence. "You state in your report that the suspect was evasive. Can you point to the moment in this video where Judge Williams was evasive?" Thompson couldn't. "You claim you were investigating a stolen vehicle. Why, then, did you not once attempt to run the license plate, a process that would have taken less than a minute?" Again, Thompson had no answer, only mumbled excuses about the situation escalating. "Officer," Chen concluded, his voice like ice, "didn't the situation escalate because you escalated it?" The trial was a media event. The courtroom was packed every day with reporters, legal scholars, and concerned citizens. The weight of the moment was palpable. Judge Williams herself took the stand, not as a judge, but as a citizen whose rights had been violated. Her testimony was powerful in its restraint. She wasn't vengeful. She was professional, factual, and unwavering. She spoke not only of her personal humiliation, but also of the broader principles at stake: the erosion of public trust when law enforcement acts on prejudice. Her neighbors, Eleanor Davis and James Mitchell, provided powerful, corroborating accounts that gave a voice to the ordinary citizen witnessing an abuse of power. Sergeant Martinez was called as a hostile witness and, under oath, was forced to admit that Officer Thompson had violated multiple department policies and that his actions were inconsistent with his training. But the star witness, the one that no cross-examination could shake, was the video itself. When David Chen played the body cam footage for the jury, a profound silence fell over the courtroom. The jurors' expressions shifted from curiosity to shock, then to visible anger. The final, violent slam of the car door echoed through the room like a gavel of guilt. The jury's deliberation was remarkably brief. In just 4 hours, they returned with a verdict that sent a clear and unequivocal message. They found that Officer Thompson had violated Judge Williams' constitutional rights and that the department and its supervisors were liable for fostering a culture that allowed it to happen. They awarded Judge Williams $910,000 in damages but the victory was not just monetary. At the insistence of Judge Williams and her legal team, the verdict came with a mandate for systemic change, a series of court-supervised reforms, including the establishment of an independent civilian oversight board with subpoena power, the complete overhaul of the department's training on racial bias and constitutional rights, and a revision of the use of force policies. He barked at her to put her hands behind her back. The cold, metallic click of the handcuffs locking around her wrists sent a shockwave of humiliation and disbelief through her. In all her years of upholding the law, she had never imagined being on this side of it, treated like a common criminal in the very place she felt safest in the world. He either didn't hear her pleas to verify her identity or, more chillingly, he simply chose to ignore them, guiding her firmly, almost roughly, to the back of his patrol car. Her expensive leather briefcase, filled with legal documents and court filings that would have instantly proven her identity, lay abandoned on the pristine pavement of her driveway, a symbol of the profession and the life that had just been so violently disregarded. What Officer Thompson didn't know, in his bubble of misplaced authority and adrenaline, was that his actions were not occurring in a vacuum. His audience was growing, and with it, the chain of events he had so recklessly set in motion was beginning to spiral far beyond his control. Across the street, Eleanor Davis, a retiree with a keen sense of her neighborhood's rhythms, stood frozen by her prize-winning rose bushes. The garden hose limp in her hand, she had lived in Oakwood Hills for over 30 years and had seen Judge Williams move in 3 years earlier. She admired the judge's quiet dignity and the professional air she carried. Eleanor had witnessed the entire shocking encounter. She saw the aggressive approach, the dismissive gestures, and the final, brutal slam of the car door. Her heart pounded in her chest. This wasn't right. This wasn't the kind of policing that made her feel safe. It was the kind that made her afraid. Fear warred with a sense of civic duty, and duty, fortified by decades of watching the world and knowing injustice. When she saw it, fumbling with hands that suddenly felt clumsy, she pulled her smartphone from her pocket, its screen a bright beacon in the gray afternoon. She hit record, her mind racing. She then made a second, more crucial call to her husband, a retired attorney. "George, you need to come to the window," she said, her voice a strained whisper. "They're arresting Judge Williams in her own driveway." On the other end of the line, George Davis's legal mind snapped into focus. "Are you recording, Eleanor?" he asked. His voice sharp and immediate. "Keep recording, get everything. The officers' faces, their badge numbers, if you can. Do not engage them directly, just be a witness." His advice was clear. Born of a lifetime spent in courtrooms, create a record, create an unimpeachable record. Meanwhile, James Mitchell, a retired corporate attorney who lived 2 houses down, was rounding the corner on his daily walk with his Beagle Duster. He saw the commotion, the flashing lights of newly arrived cruisers, the small cluster of concerned neighbors beginning to form at a distance. He recognized Judge Williams's Mercedes instantly and then, with a jolt of disbelief, saw the judge herself being guided toward a patrol car in handcuffs. James knew the judge not just as a neighbor but from a personal, profound experience. 2 years prior, his younger brother had appeared before her in a contentious civil matter. James had attended every day of the hearing, and he had been deeply impressed by her even-handedness, her meticulous attention to detail, and the fundamental respect she afforded everyone in her courtroom. He felt a surge of protective indignation. Cautiously, he approached the scene, leaving Buster's leash tied to a nearby lamppost. "Officer," he began, his voice calm and respectful, "I believe there has been a terrible mistake." Officer Thompson turned, his eyes narrowed, his posture a wall of defiance. "Step back, sir. This is an active police investigation." "I understand that," James persisted, choosing his words carefully, as if addressing a hostile witness. "But I know that woman. That is Judge Patricia Williams. She lives in that house right there. She is a federal judge." Thompson's face tightened. The challenge to his authority, especially from another citizen, was more than he could tolerate. "I don't care who you say she is, she's a suspect in a vehicle theft. Now, I'm telling you for the last time to back away, or I'll arrest you for interfering." The threat hung in the air, thick and menacing. James, a man who had spent his life navigating conflict through reason and law, was stunned into silence. He recognized the futility of arguing with a man who had already closed his mind to the truth. He took a slow step back, his gaze fixed on the patrol car where Judge Williams now sat, invisible behind the tinted glass. He too pulled out his phone, not to record, but to start making calls, first to a friend at the local news station, and then to a contact at the state Civil Liberties Union. The situation was spiraling, fueled by one man's prejudice and the system's failure to check it. For 35 agonizing and deeply humiliating minutes, Judge Williams sat cuffed in the back of the patrol car. The minutes stretched into an eternity. She could feel the rough, cheap plastic of the back seat against her tailored blazer. She could smell the stale chemical air freshener mingling with the scent of industrial cleaner, a scent she associated with holding cells and the grim realities of the criminal justice system. Through the wire cage separating the front and back seats, the flashing red and blue lights of the newly arrived backup cruisers painted a disorienting, strobing pattern on the familiar facade of her own home. The humiliation was compounded by the growing crowd of neighbors, their faces a mixture of confusion, concern, and quiet outrage. They were watching her, a federal judge, a pillar of their community, being treated like a common criminal. Inside her head, two versions of herself were at war. There was Patricia, the woman, who felt a primal fear and a searing anger. The indignity of it was almost unbearable. But there was also Judge Williams, the legal scholar, whose mind was methodically, almost coldly, analyzing the situation. Unlawful seizure. She thought. A clear violation of the Fourth Amendment. No probable cause. Failure to verify. This is not a mistake. This is misconduct. Asterisk, she was building her case, mentally documenting every word, every action, every procedural failure. She was no longer just a victim. She was the primary witness in her own civil rights case. The arrival of a third patrol car brought Sergeant Sarah Martinez to the scene. A respected veteran with 12 years on the force, Martinez had a reputation for being level-headed and professional. As she stepped out of her vehicle, her experienced eyes quickly took in the scene. The upscale, quiet street. The expensive car in the driveway. The well-dressed woman sitting in handcuffs in Thompson's car. The agitated group of neighbors being held back by the other officers. Nothing about it added up. This wasn't the typical scene of a vehicle theft arrest. She approached Thompson, her voice low and firm. "Thompson, what's your 20? Talk to me." Thompson, visibly flustered by the presence of a superior officer and the growing audience, recounted his version of events. Received a bolo for a stolen black Mercedes. This vehicle matched the description. The driver was evasive. Claimed to be a judge. I placed her under arrest for vehicle theft and resisting. Sergeant Martinez's eyes narrow. Did you run the plates before you made the stop? Thompson hesitated for a fraction of a second too long. I was in the process of ... The situation escalated. Sergeant. Did you verify her identity? Martinez pressed. Her gaze unwavering. She claims to be a federal judge. Did you ask for her judicial credentials? She didn't have them on her. Thompson retorted, his defensiveness growing. She could be anybody. Martinez knew better. She had seen this kind of sloppy, assumption-based police work before, and it always ended badly. She turned away from Thompson and walked toward the patrol car where Judge Williams was being held. Through the window, she could see the judge, sitting upright, her expression one of remarkable composure despite the circumstances. Martinez had spent her career learning to read people, and she saw no deception in those eyes, only a profound, controlled anger. At that moment, Eleanor Davis approached her, phone still in hand. "Officer," she said, her voice shaking but clear, "that woman is my neighbor, Judge Patricia Williams. I have this whole thing on video." He wouldn't even listen to her. Sergeant Martinez made her decision. She keyed her radio. "Dispatch, I need a run on a Patricia Williams. Date of birth ... double quotes." She relayed the information she had obtained from the neighbors. The request was now official, logged, and timed. The seconds ticked by, each one an indictment of Thompson's failure. The confirmation came back in moments, the dispatcher's voice crackling with an undertone of urgency. "Sergeant, be advised, subject is Patricia Williams, a sitting United States District Court judge, no wants or warrants. The vehicle is registered to her at that address. I repeat, subject is a federal judge." A heavy silence fell over the officers at the scene. Sergeant Martinez turned to face Thompson, her expression a mixture of fury and disbelief. "Get her out of the car, now." Judge Williams was released. The handcuffs came off, leaving angry, chafing red marks on her wrists that would later bruise into deep purple welts. As she stepped out of the car, she didn't look at Thompson. She looked directly at Sergeant Martinez. "Thank you, Sergeant," she said, her voice even. "I will need the name and badge number of every officer who was present here today." That visceral, 15-second clip, along with the patrol car's dispassionate dashboard camera footage, would become the irrefutable heart of a legal storm. It captured everything: the unwarranted hostility, the abuse of power, the calm dignity of the woman being wronged. It was a raw, unfiltered record of an encounter that would unravel careers, expose deep-seated systemic failures, and ultimately become the most expensive and consequential traffic stop in American history. It had begun, as such things often do, with the mundane. It was 2:15 on a quiet Tuesday afternoon. The sky was a uniform, brooding gray, casting a muted, flat light over the tranquil, winding streets of the Oakwood Hills subdivision. Judge Patricia Williams, navigating the familiar curve of her street, felt the accumulated tension of a long day in federal court begin to melt away. The weight of the gavel, the intricate, often serpentine arguments of counsel, and the heavy burden of judicial responsibility were finally behind her. She had just concluded a week-long hearing in a complex and emotionally draining civil rights case involving police misconduct. She had listened to hours of testimony detailing a pattern of harassment and discrimination, her mind meticulously sorting fact from allegation, her heart aching for the victims. It was a bitter irony she would soon come to appreciate with piercing, personal clarity. Now, driving home, she was looking forward to nothing more than a peaceful evening with her husband, a respected physician, and their daughter, a bright, ambitious first-year law student. Her home was her sanctuary, a place where she could shed the formidable mantle of Judge Williams and simply be Patricia. Judge Patricia Williams was no ordinary person. At 52 years old, she was a figure of profound respect in the legal world, a woman whose life story was a testament to the very ideals of justice she championed from the bench. Her journey had been one of relentless ascent against the odds. Born the daughter of a steel worker who toiled in the blistering heat of the mills and a school teacher who patiently shaped young minds in an underfunded public school, she grew up in a working-class neighborhood where ambition was a luxury and survival was the daily curriculum. Her parents, however, instilled in her an unshakable belief in the power of hard work, the non-negotiable value of education, and the moral imperative to stand up for what's right, especially when it was difficult. She vividly remembered, as a young girl, watching her father organize with his union, his voice firm and unwavering as he fought for fair wages and safe working conditions. She saw her mother stay late after school every day, using her own meager salary to buy books and supplies for students who had none. These were the foundational lessons that shaped her character and her destiny. With a combination of fierce intelligence and an unparalleled work ethic, she earned a scholarship that took her to the hallowed, ivy-covered halls of Harvard Law School. She was a world away from the grit and determination of her childhood, often feeling like an outsider in an institution built on generations of legacy and privilege. She faced the subtle biases, the quiet condescension, the unspoken assumption that she didn't truly belong, but she met it all with a quiet, unyielding determination, graduating summa cum laude and silencing the skeptics not with anger, but with excellence. Her career was a deliberate ladder of public service. She began as a federal prosecutor, where she spent 15 years earning a reputation as a tough but scrupulously fair litigator. She was as relentless in pursuing justice for victims as she was in safeguarding the constitutional rights of the accused. This was followed by a decade in private practice, where she took on challenging civil rights cases, often pro bono, fighting for the voiceless against powerful corporations and government entities. Her work did not go unnoticed. The call from the White House, informing her of a presidential appointment to the federal bench, was the culmination of a lifetime of work. It was an honor she accepted with a profound sense of humility and responsibility, a promise to the community she came from and the nation she served. On the bench, she was known for her sharp intellect and an encyclopedic knowledge of constitutional law, but more than that, she was known for her humanity and her unyielding sense of fairness. Her colleagues, even those who had faced her as adversaries in court, described her as someone who treated every individual who entered her courtroom from the wealthiest CEO to the most destitute defendant with the same measure of dignity. She had presided over hundreds of cases, many involving allegations of police misconduct and racial discrimination, never once imagining that she would one day become the subject of such a case herself, on her own property. That Tuesday afternoon, she was driving the black Mercedes sedan she had purchased just 6 months prior. It wasn't an act of indulgence, but a celebration of a milestone, a personal reward to herself after receiving a Distinguished Service Award from the State Bar Association for her contributions to jurisprudence. It was a symbol of her journey, a tangible piece of the life she had built in the quiet, tree-lined, and expensive neighborhood she called home. This sanctuary, this piece of the American dream, was a place she had worked her entire life to afford. She took a deep, quiet pride in knowing her success had opened doors for her family that her own parents could only have dreamed of. As she turned into her driveway, the police cruiser pulled in behind her, its lights not yet flashing. It was a minor curiosity, nothing more. Police patrols were irregular, even reassuring, citing her community. She was in the process of gathering her briefcase from the passenger seat, her mind already shifting from legal precedents to what she would make for dinner, when the sharp, aggressive slam of another car door shattered the afternoon's peace and her world. The officer who emerged from the cruiser was William Thompson. He had been on the force for 8 years, a tenure long enough to build a reputation and a history. His official personnel file, a document that would later be scrutinized with painstaking detail, told a story that his superiors had either negligently missed or willfully ignored. It was a document filled with red flags, a troubling pattern of 14 citizen complaints, 12 of which involved contentious interactions with black motorists, alleging everything from unwarranted stops and illegal searches to verbal abuse and excessive force. But on that Tuesday afternoon, Officer Thompson was operating on a potent cocktail of instinct, assumption, and the unchecked authority his badge provided. He was about to make a decision that would not only unravel his own life, but also cast a harsh, unwelcome spotlight on his entire department and the very justice system it was sworn to uphold. He approached her vehicle with a posture of preemptive aggression, a deliberate swagger in his step. His hand rested on his service weapon, not out of any discernible threat, but as a clear, calculated assertion of dominance. His expression was a mask of stern suspicion. The polite, professional greeting Judge Williams expected, "Good afternoon, ma'am," never came. Instead, she was met with a brusque, aggressive demand, a tone that presumed guilt and immediately set her on edge. Her years on the bench had trained her to read people, their body language, their vocal inflections, the subtle cues of their intent. The signals this officer was sending were all wrong. They screamed of hostility and prejudice. Her calm, logical explanation that this was her car, parked in her own driveway, was met with a wall of escalating hostility. His response, later dissected by legal experts and civil rights attorneys across the country, was a textbook example of racial profiling in action. His mind had already connected a series of prejudiced dots. A black woman driving an expensive car in a wealthy, predominantly white neighborhood must equal a crime. The possibility that she was a resident, a successful professional who had earned her place in this community, was not a variable his biased calculus could accommodate. When he accused her of vehicle theft and resisting arrest, the sheer absurdity of the charge was staggering. She was at her own home, in her own car, holding her own briefcase. The concept of resisting was a dangerous fiction he was creating in real time to justify his actions. In that crucial, terrifying moment, Judge Williams made the decision that likely saved the situation from escalating into physical violence. She summoned every ounce of her judicial temperament, every lesson in de-escalation she had ever learned or taught. She would remain calm, she would be compliant. She would methodically build her record. She would not give him the satisfaction or the legal pretext to justify further aggression. Slowly, deliberately, she complied with his order and stepped out of her car, keeping her hands open and visible, a universal sign of non-aggression that he seemed not to register. She calmly and clearly repeated her name and her position as a federal judge, requesting that he simply verify her identity. This reasonable request, a fundamental step in any legitimate police investigation, seemed only to enrage him more. It was a direct challenge to his snap judgment, an affront to his authority. In the end, Judge Williams, true to her character and the principles that had guided her entire life, used a significant portion of the settlement to establish *** the Williams Foundation for Judicial and Policing Integrity ***. It was an organization dedicated to supporting victims of police misconduct, funding legal challenges against systemic injustice, and working to build bridges between communities and law enforcement. Her personal ordeal, born from one officer's prejudice on a quiet Tuesday afternoon, had been transformed into a powerful, enduring catalyst for change, sending ripples of accountability far beyond her own driveway. As for William Thompson, his career in law enforcement was over. Fired and facing the prospect of criminal charges, he became unemployable. The public nature of the case meant that no other department would hire him. His family faced harassment and threats, and they were ultimately forced to relocate to another state to escape the negative attention. The ripple effects of his actions had destroyed not only his own life, but had also deeply impacted those he loved. The case of Judge Patricia Williams became a landmark, a turning point in the national conversation about police reform and accountability. It served as a stark reminder that injustice can touch anyone, regardless of their station in life, but that the determined pursuit of justice, armed with truth and guided by principle, can indeed change the world. Sometimes, justice takes time, but when it finally arrives, it changes everything.